What is groundwater? Groundwater is water that is below the Earth's surface. It saturates the spaces between rocks, soil, and gravel called the aquifer. This water moves through the aquifer and can be found nearly everywhere, from a few feet to hundreds of feet below the surface. Groundwater is a very important natural resource because people rely on it for drinking water, and it is a primary source of irrigation for crops. In rural areas, wells provide nearly all the water consumed and used. The top of the groundwater is called the water table, and the level of the water table can rise and fall depending on the time of year. In the spring, the water table will rise due to rain and melting snow. Then, when the hot, dry summer sets in, the water table will drop. Many people think the amount of groundwater is infinite, but that's not the case. Excessive use can deplete the supply faster than it can be replaced by nature. The water usually flows slowly through the aquifer, and it can take years to travel a couple of miles. But in a more permeable area, such as limestone, it can move much faster. If the water becomes contaminated, it can spread to other areas. It's crucial to detect and correct contaminated groundwater because it's a problem that can last for years. However, cleaning up contamination can be extremely expensive, and there are times when it can't be fixed. How groundwater can become contaminated. While the aquifer strains larger debris out of the water naturally through percolation, it cannot filter out all pollutants, and groundwater is very vulnerable to contamination. This contamination can come from landfills, leakage from waste disposal sites, or underground storage tanks, septic systems, illegal disposal of hazardous materials, overuse of farming pesticides or fertilizers, road salt contamination, or other human activities. Once groundwater is polluted, it becomes unsafe to drink and has to be cleaned before it can be used. Identifying and fixing contaminated groundwater. As the real estate agent, you want to be sure your buyer knows as much as possible about the property they are buying, including the condition of the groundwater. Resources include the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, which has a list of Superfund sites, properties identified with hazardous waste. An environmental inspector can determine if there are any problems that need to be addressed by doing a test of the groundwater. In rural areas, the location of a septic tank and well should be investigated. A driller's log will contain details about the well which could be useful to the buyer. It's important to know the source of the water, the distance between the septic tank and the well location, the slope of the land, and other environmental factors. One of the most common issues in areas with a septic tank and well is bacterial contamination caused by septic effluent. A water analysis test will determine the quality of the water. If your buyer purchases a property with a septic system and a well, advise them to have the septic system pumped and inspected as recommended, and the well should be tested as frequently as the pollution risk dictates. Prevention is less expensive than mitigation, and when the buyer is ready to sell, they'll appreciate your advice and contact you to list the property. Clean water regulations. The first significant law that addressed water pollution was the Federal Water Pollution Control Act of 1948. As public concerns about the quality of water increased, the act was amended in 1972 to address these, and it became known as the Clean Water Act, or CWA. The amendments gave the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, The ability to set standards for wastewater. It established standards for contaminants and pollutant discharges into the water. The CWA continues to evolve to meet new safety concerns as they come up. Remediation and cleanup. The method for cleaning up groundwater contamination depends on the type of contamination and the location. Sometimes, in addition to cleaning the water, the soil must also be cleaned so the contamination doesn't reoccur. When the contamination can be remedied, there are several methods that can be used, but a few common ones are pump and treat approach. This requires the groundwater to be pumped up and cleaned, then returned to the ground. This is only effective if the contaminating materials are completely removed or recontamination could occur. Bioremediation. The right bacteria can consume the contamination, and that's the idea behind the bioremediation approach. Nutrients are added to the naturally occurring organisms to stimulate them to use the contaminants for food. Soil vapor extraction, SVE. Another way to stimulate the bacteria is to use air to create movement and to remove the contaminants. This is done by drilling extraction wells, then pulling the vapors out so they can be treated. Risk-based remediation involves one or more of the following. Active remediation aims to reduce or eliminate the contamination. Engineering controls are physical barriers that are designed to contain the contamination, like a concrete pad over contaminated soil. Land use controls, or industrial controls, limit or restrict certain ways of using the property to minimize or eliminate future contamination, and these controls are recorded in the chain of title. If the property nearby has land use control limits, this could affect the property that is being purchased and should be researched. As a real estate agent, it's essential to encourage your clients to do due diligence and have all the inspections necessary to provide peace of mind. If they have concerns about current or future liability, it's advisable for them to consult an environmental attorney or expert. In some areas, lenders require tests for possible contaminants, including in the groundwater. States vary as to the laws and responsibility for property that is contaminated, and you should check your state's laws regarding the responsibilities of the buyers and sellers so you can advise your clients appropriately and direct them to the suitable professionals.